Hi guys, this is William, and welcome to another video from the Play-agricola.com YouTube channel. So we've concluded our tournament, haven't put up any videos for a while, so there have been a couple requests for people to do first-person analysis and commentary of a game, so just, me talking myself through all my actions and analyzing the game and talking about the draft and everything. Definitely been meaning to do that. Problem is, I usually like to watch TV or listen to music when I'm playing, so I have to pick a game where I don't do that, as well as try to get like an evenly balanced game where there are interesting things to talk about. Um, but in the meantime, what's really easy to do is do. I thought I'd do a little bit of a draft discussion, um, looking at a couple drafts from my most recent games, talking about you know. Why I made some of the decisions the way I did. So this video, I guess, is probably not going to be too interesting to someone who's really experienced with playing the game online, especially not if you're stronger than me. Um, but if you maybe play offline, you're interested in Agricola, you want to increase your better your game, then I'd say this video is more for you. So all the games I've been playing have been with the EIK decks, which are the standard ones that are included in the base game. Then also with WM, which is the World Championship deck, otherwise known as G2, which was published a little more like a year or two ago. Um, that was also made and play tested and everything online, and was used for the World Championships in Vienna. And then the G3 as well, which is the France deck, which of course was just published about 2 months ago. So yeah, so I'll try to bring up some of the cards that I'm talking about on the right side of my screen if you don't know their names. Um, but otherwise, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, it might be helpful to if you have the cards at home, or if you have like a compendium. Actually, you know what? I'll show you guys a great place if you ever have rules questions or anything. If you Google Agricola compendium. So this alevine.net has the compendium which covers EGIK. So the first gamer's deck, which is G1, and then EIK, which covers all the, your base game. If you haven't purchased any extra decks, but you have like questions about card interactions and stuff, this unofficial Agricola compendium covers all that. And it's basically been, there's one guy who was really on top of things, and organized all the discussions that we had online and everything into this awesome document. Um, so yeah, so if you don't, not sure how to pull up the handy list on the right-hand side of the screen, the Agricola Compendium is good for that too. Anyway, so I'm going to jump into a draft. This is a game that I just finished playing, actually. And it's an example of a game where I think I got lucky because other players undervalued good cards, which, to be honest, can make a huge difference. So if you play a lot and you're having trouble, one really easy thing to improve is your draft. It's hard to know always, you know, uh, what card you should take when, but in general, you want to be taking the best card. And if you take the best card every time in your hand, then that's going to should lead to at least a good hand for you, if not, the best hand that you could have gotten. But yeah, so this is a game I just finished. So my first occupation hand, actually, I'll make this text a little bigger. So my first hand had Bargaining Baker, House Steward, and sorry, so these cards are going to be organized in terms of their average draft position on the Play-agricola.com, as well as the powers, which are a stat that is related to how often playing a card leads to the person who played it winning. I'm not entirely sure what the math is, but power is a very good sense of how strong a card is. And ADP, the average draft position, is also a sense of how strong it is, but more correlates to people's preferences or cards. There's some cards you would want to take first because then you can build a draft around them, whereas other cards, if your hand's decided, you can't pick them up last because they'll be worthless to you. So in general, what you want to be doing is taking the card at the top of the list when it's ordered by ADP and if it has the highest power as well, then that's like a pretty easy take. So for me, I had Bargaining Baker, which is a really strong card that I like a lot. It's in the I don't have the G deck or I don't have the WM deck open. Just a minute, I'm gonna pull that up because that's gonna be good to see. Sorry about this. Oh, I do. G2. Oh, it's G3 that I don't have open. Okay. I thought I had G3 open. Oh, you know what? These tabs haven't been renamed. So Chris obviously just copy and pasted it. Anyways, that's fine. So G2, so I can go to Bargaining Baker. So Bargaining Baker. Why is this card good? Okay. So the reason this card is strong is because it lets you the problem with feeding with grain is that usually you end up having to go on the take one grain action space a lot. And that space is really weak. If you're using it just to take one grain, it's a very weak action compared to pretty much anything else. Like, I mean, maybe two food is just as bad, but like anything else, like 3 wood, 2 wood, playing an occupation, reedstone food, building your farm, like any of that, take one green is a really weak spot. But what Bargaining Baker lets you do is it gives you a grain when you play a baking improvement, and so then the synergy is that you can build a clay oven and then get a grain and then eat it right away. The other thing that Bargaining Baker is nice is it decreases the cost of the oven. So it's just a really easy way for you to feed. If you can play Bargaining Baker and in stage 2 get a clay oven, that's your 5 food that you need to feed for that second stage, for that second harvest. And then hopefully you get the stone oven as well later. And of course, building the major improvements are good for points as well. So it's a really nice way to feed early on. Some other cards in the pile, House Steward. Take a look at House Steward. Actually, I'm not sure what deck he's in. He is definitely in I or K. Oh, maybe he's in E. I think he's in K, though. There it is. House Steward. So House Steward actually has a higher power than Bargaining Baker, but a lower average draft position. So House Steward is a 4 wood Ock. So any of these Ocks that give you 4 wood and then have bonus points available at the end of the game, usually they are very strong cards because, fulfilling their conditions, like having a lot of rooms gives you lots of people, which should lead to a lot of points, and then you get bonus points on top of that for having a lot of rooms. I have a lot of trouble playing this card well because I chase the House Steward too far and then end up with 5 rooms and no fences, and that really hurts you. The only other card in this draft that I really consider for first pick is Fence Deliveryman. Fence Deliveryman is really nice. He combos really well with a whole lot of cards. There he is. Fence deliveryman. Um, so the nice thing about this is that it lets you build fences twice for the cost of 2 wood to get 2 food to get 4 wood for your fences, for 4 fences. So that conversion is really nice. Paying 2 wood to get 2 food to get 4 wood is a very good conversion. The other thing that is really nice about this guy is usually you only want to fence once during the game, because like taking 1 grain, fencing is kind of a weak action unless you have other reasons to do it. So fence deliveryman, what's nice about him is that he will get you a little pasture in the mid game, which will let you hold, say 3 sheep or 3 boar, and then you can eat one, and then it'll breed back at the end of the harvest, and that'll hold you, 1 breeding pair, and then towards the end of the game it gets you space for another breeding pair, and then if you want, you can build your own fences on top of that at some point. But what's really nice about him too is he combos really well with a lot of cards. A lot of cards that encourage building fences multiple times. The fence deliveryman combos really well with them, and that's why he's strong. So anyways, I took Bargaining Baker. So I'm thinking House Steward is going to be gone. Fence Deliveryman's going to be gone. I think probably Village Fool is the fourth best card in this pile. But Racing Stable Manager, which is a new France deck card, is drafted above it. So hard to know. So I'm probably going to get, Racing Stable Manager, Village Fool, Adoptive Parents. I'm going to get one of those cards back. None of them are really like game-changing cards or that combo super well with anything. I mean, Racing Stable Manager combos with stable cards. But yeah. Anyway, so moving on. So my first pick was Bargaining Baker. So second pile, I've got Stonecutter, Fence Dealer, Stable Deliveryman, Animal Welfarist, and the rest probably not really worth mentioning because they're all fairly weak cards. So Stonecutter. Stonecutter is a very nice card. He is in, is he in K? He's probably in E actually. So I've pretty much never played with just E or just I or just K, so I know what if the card is in EIK, but I don't know if it's in E or in I or in K. Stonecutter. Okay, so Stonecutter is a powerful card because he gets you stone. He lets you have access to more stone early in the game, so you can build, the well or some other major improvements. He also is really nice because there are a lot of minor improvements that cost 1 stone that are worth a point usually, and the Stonecutter lets you build them for free. So it's basically, you play this occupation and then all your stone miners are free for a point. So Stonecutter is a nice card. Fence Dealer. Fence Dealer is in G2. Oh, and I should say Stonecutter combos pretty well with my Bargaining Baker because with Bargaining Baker, I'm going to want to play 2 ovens, which are each going to cost me a stone. And if I draft any oven cards in my minor improvements, it'll help me play those as well. So yes, the Stonecutter combos pretty well with Bargaining Baker. Reasonably well. Okay, and then Fence Dealer. Now, Fence Dealer is the highest power in this deck. And so what Fence Dealer does is it lets you build 6 fences for free, basically, if you have 6 wood at the end of the game. Now the drawback is, of course, you can only build 12, but this card, if you're in a situation where you're going into round 12, which is third last round, and you have no wood in your hand, um, playing a fence stealer, or if you have, 3 wood, for example, fence stealer is basically the equivalent of a 6 wood action. So you have 6 wood, and then you build 12 fences total, and 12 is enough to have like a reasonable fencing layout. You can do, the small pastures with the cross, so you have 4 pastures, it covers 4 spaces. That's, not bad. You can cover 9 if you just need to cover up your farmyard because you don't have a lot of fields or rooms. That works as well. Um, so yeah, so Fence Stealer is a really nice card. I think people don't like him because he doesn't let you get 15 fences. So that's kind of a drawback. But I've learned that this guy, especially I guess for my playstyle too, he's really nice. But what I ended up doing is I ended up playing Stable Deliveryman, which is another WM card. Or so what deck is he in? There he is. Okay, yeah, he's another WM card. So the reason I took Stable Deliveryman, he's not that strong, but he combos nicely with a lot of. There are a lot of cards that say when you build a stable, do this. Like Fence Overseer. Um, yeah, Fence Overseer. Whenever you build a stable, pay a food to build 4 fences. Or the card that I saw in my first pile, which was the Racing Stable Manager, which is a France deck card. And the Racing Stable Manager says, whenever you build at least 1 stable, you can pay 1 food to plow a field. So if I played Racing Stable Manager and Stable Deliveryman, I would get to 4 times throughout the game, pay 1 food and 1 wood to build a stable and plow a field. And that would be a pretty nice combo because I would get to plow 4 fields for 1 action and 2 actions and 4 food. Well, 5 or 6 food, but whatever. It would be a pretty nice combo. And there's also the chance that there are other good cards that combo with it. So I mean, I could have taken Fence Stealer, Stonecutter here, but I was hoping for the combo with Racing Stable Manager, so that's why I took it. Animal Welfarist is another interesting card, and it goes pretty well with Racing Stable Manager too. It's a France deck card, and it says if you use build stables and build fences actions, then at the end of the round you do both of them in a stage or in a round. At the end of that round you get 1 of each type of animal. Now this is nice at the end of the game because you can, instead of take 1 cattle, take 1 boar, take 1 sheep, you can build fences, which you might already want to do anyways, and build a room / build a stable, which you might want to do anyways. And oh look, you get 1 of each type of animal, which could be 6 points if you don't have any animals already. Yeah. So the rest of these cards, those are the top 4 cards. I ended up going with the Stable Deliveryman. Yeah. Okay. So looking at my next pile, so I have Bargaining Baker and Stable Deliveryman in my hand. So I've got Magician, Wood Gatherer, Sun Farmer, Master Brewer. Those are the top 4 cards. Although I would say probably Tenant Farmer and Tavern Keeper are better. Yeah, so I'm looking at Magician, Wood Gatherers, Sun Farmer, maybe Tavern Keeper or Tenant Farmer. So Magician. Magician is a I think it's an E card. Nope. So maybe he's an I card. Nope. So he's a K card. So Magician. Whenever you use your last person to take traveling players, you get an additional 1 grain and 1 food. So this is pretty nice because it lets you go on traveling players with your last action. So like it's not a high priority action, and it gets you an extra wood and a grain. And so probably in a normal game, you could use this, you know, 3 or 4 times to get, 4 food and 4 grain. But what's really nice about him is you can play him in round 1 or 2, and then with your last action take magician, so you get 3 food and a grain, which is really good for a stage 1 action. Um, so yeah, so this card's pretty good, and he's the one that I ended up taking. He's got the lowest average draft position and the highest power. So whenever those two numbers go together, it's a pretty easy pickup for me. Wood Gatherers is a France deck card, and it says whenever you pay 4 or more for stuff, you get 4 wood, 4 or more wood. You get 2 back at the end of the round. So Wood Gatherers actually is an interesting card if you're going to build a lot of rooms once or build a lot of fences, and you have reasons to do it instead of all at once, one at a time, one room at a time. Um, it's kind of an interesting card. Um, Another one is that I looked at taking is Sun Farmer, which gets you grain if you take sheep, or sheep if you take grain. Um, at the moment, I haven't decided how I'm feeding later on in the game. I know with Bargaining Baker, I'm going to get ovens, so you might say Sun Farmer is good for me because it'll get me grain, or sheep if I go on one of those actions. But the whole point of Bargaining Baker is that I don't want to have to take a grain. I pretty much never want to have to do that. So I didn't go with Sun Farmer. I went with Magician. Okay, so my fourth pile, I've got Bargaining Baker, Stable Deliveryman, and Magician. Um, so Manservant is the one at the top of this list, and Manservant is... What deck is he in? He's an I. He's an I deck card. So Manservant is really good if you have another reason to rush to a stone house. For example, Scholar, Plow Driver. You get 3 rooms, you get your first growth, and then you try to get to a stone house as early as possible in order to get, some benefit, which is about equivalent to having a 4th person. And that's about what Manservant is. If you think of one action gets you 3 food, having played Manservant gives you an extra action for the rest of the game if you're in a stone house. Um, and the reason that is because you can feed with Manservant instead of playing, having to take animals and eat them, or having to take, fishing, or, bait grain or whatever. Your feeding is dealt with, so you can do other stuff instead. So Manservant's a nice card, but not worth going to Stone House on its own, I think. You want to use it if you have some other incentive to go to a Stone House. The next card is Fiddler, and it actually has the highest power in this pack. Fiddler is a France deck card. Now, it might be a little high. One thing, I think all the powers and all the ADPs on the France deck are a little stronger than they normally should be, so probably people are overvaluing the new cards a little, not sure where they fit in exactly. But still, Fiddler is an interesting card. Says it's any round where you don't receive building resources, you can get a wood, and if it's an even number round, you get a food. So when it's an even number round, what Fiddler basically does is says, if you used your first action to do anything other than take resources, you can consider all the non-resource piles as having 1 food and 1 wood on them. So like if you use your first action to family growth and you only have one other person, you could take 3 wood, or you could plow a field and get a wood and a food. So normally if your choice is 3 wood or plow a field, you're probably always going to take 3 wood. But with the fiddler, it encourages you to do other things. So, if you have the fiddler, you want to try to plow a lot of fields early, or, maybe build improvements on even numbered rounds or whatever. Um, yeah, so he's an interesting card. Um, Sometimes you can tell early on in a game too, like, oh, it's going to be this kind of game where I'm going to plow a lot early, and then the fiddler can be very useful in games like that. Um, Other cards in here, so the next highest power is Cattle Whisperer, and that is, I think that's an E deck. Yes, that's an E deck card. So Cattle Whisperer basically says, play this in stage 1, and later on in the game you get 2 cattle, which takes a long time for it to pay off. And getting a cattle is good, and if you can hold the cattle, that's great. And if this lets you, gives you enough to breed them or whatever, lets you play a minor improvement that needs cattle, or helps a milking hand, that's nice. But generally, you don't want to like plan a game around this. You don't go out of your way to play Cattle Whisper. You're only going to do it, oh hey, there are no good actions for me. I can afford to play an occupation. I'll definitely be getting a cooking hearth later on in the game, so what the hell, I'll play Cattle Whisperer. It's kind of a last resort thing. So I ended up taking Fiddler from this pile. So now I see my first pile back. I've got Village Fool, Adoptive Parents, Branch Collector, Organic Farmer, Weaver, and Pawnbroker. So Village Fool is the card that I ended up taking, and according to the stats is the best card in the pile. What Village Fool does is says, did you draft poorly? Oh, that's okay. Take Village Fool, play it reasonably early, and you're going to get a bunch of bonus points for all those cards that you drafted poorly. So I was disappointed that I didn't get Racing Stable Manager here, because I picked the Stable Deliveryman. So I'm thinking, hey, Stable Deliveryman is pretty much going to be useless to me. That's a card that I could get rid of with Village Fool. Maybe my miners are bad. Oh, I can get rid of them with Village Fool. Oh, maybe I decide not to play Fiddler, because if you're going to do Fiddler, you do it early. Well, that's a card to get rid of with Village Fool. So it's a pretty easy way to, you play it in round 10, and then you can discard at 11, 12, 13, 14, and you get 3 points. So basically it turns out to be one action for 3 points most of the time. Play it 2 rounds earlier, it's 4 points, yeah. So the other cards in this pile that I looked at, Adoptive Parents is not bad. The only downside for Adoptive Parents is you have to use an action to gain an action later. So you have to use the action to play the occupation in order to get an action later when you adopt on your family growth. So pretty much you only want to play Adoptive Parents if you know you're going to grow twice. Probably you only want to do it if you're going to grow 3 times. Being able to adopt in round 12 and 13, when there are a lot of high quality actions, can be very good. But there's also the element of you have to use an action to get one later. That makes it worse for sure. If you have a way to play occupations without using actions, like educator, job seeker, I can't think of the other ones at the moment, but Adoptive Parents goes up in value a lot because of the fact that you don't have to use an action in order to get one. And the other thing is sometimes in, if you want to adopt in round 7, for example. So you've gotten, your first family growth, use it with your first action, and you have 5 food, and you're going to have a harvest. If you use the food to adopt, you only have 4, and then you're going to have to feed 6. So you basically have to use that action to take day labor, which doesn't add anything to your farm, in which case, it wasn't worth it. It's not worth adopting. So it's not always worth adopting. If you have a way to get a lot of food easily, then it definitely goes up in value. Um, yeah. So I took Village Fool. I was disappointed that Racy Stable Manager didn't come back, but Village Fool compensates for that a little because I can throw away the Stable Deliveryman, which I drafted instead of, one of the other good cards from that pile. So the 6 pile has Fence Stealer, and I was considering Fence Stealer for my first pick from this pile. So it's a pretty easy take for me to do it now. So Fence Stealer. Talked about it earlier, but yeah, that card is going to be nice for me. It's going to be a 6 wood action, and if I want to fence early, then it lets me fence early and then fill up the rest of my farms with field and animals for the rest of the game. Or say I decide to go field route early, I can get a lot of fields, and then at the very end of the game I play Fence Stealer, build a bunch of fences, covers up the rest of my farm. Yeah, Fence Stealer by far is the best card here. In my opinion, I'd have to look at what the other players took, but they probably should not have passed this. Probably they undervalued this card, I would say. Other card from this pile, Cook's got a power of 2. Cook basically is 2 food per harvest. Sometimes it's 3 food. Sometimes it's 1. It's a pretty weak card in general. And then Master Forester. Having Master Forester in the game just completely changes the game. So I think that he is an E-deck card. So Master Forester basically increases the amount of wood in a 4-player game by 30% because it's an extra 2 wood card. So normally you're going to have 6 coming into the game every round. This makes it 8. So yeah, so it's an increase of 33%, which is huge. It changes the game in a lot of ways. It makes it, instead of, people scrambling to take 4 wood, instead there's going to be 6 wood actions available a lot of the time, which just increases the quality of your turns, lets people build bigger farms and stuff. So just, it changes the game, especially in a 4-player, because it increases the wood amount available by so much. Now with my 7th occupation, I ended up taking, all of these cards are pretty weak. For me, the choice is between Tenant Farmer and Tavern Keeper. I'm not going to play Master Brewer because I'm going to get a way to eat grain with my Bargaining Baker, so I don't want to have to eat it at a cheaper rate, at a less efficient rate. Clay Digger is similar to Master Forester in that it changes the game, which you don't necessarily want to do if you think you have a good hand. You just want to play normal. So for me, it's between Tenant Farmer and Tavern Keeper. So I'll go take a look at Tenant Farmer first, and I think that's a K-deck card. Nope. So maybe he's an E-deck card. There he is. So Tenant Farmer. Tenant Farmer might seem kind of stupid to you because you get a sheep, a boar, and a cattle when you play them, but then you'd have to give them back at the end of the game, and if you don't, you lose a point. So why would you ever want to play Tenant Farmer? Well, what Tenant Farmer can do is it's kind of similar to the card that I was talking about earlier. I can't remember its name right now, where Suppose you come to round 14 and you've built a really big house and you've plowed a bunch of fields and you've got lots of grain and vegetables, but you didn't fence until round 14. Um, so you didn't have time to hold any animals in your house. You never got, cooking hearth or a fireplace, or if you did, you ate all the animals that you had. Um, so if you have none, like say you have a pretty good farm, except you don't have any animals, well, a tenant farmer basically turns into a 3-point card because you can take a sheep, a boar, and a cattle and then choose not to return them, and you lose 1 point, but you gain 2 points. For each animal, you lose 1 point, but you gain 2 points. So it's basically a 3-point card. Now, 3 points is not that much, but if you compare it to taking one sheep, well, then that taking a sheep is 2 points at the end of the game for you. So playing a tenant farmer would be slightly better than that. So actually, the way that we can rate a lot of these occupations that give points is, do they give you 3 points and under what conditions and when? So in a kind of a very unique condition, tenant farmer can give you 3 points. He's also useful, if you need to get, say, boar or cattle early and they're not available to you. The tenant farmer can do that for you. But I ended up going with Tavern Keeper, which is a WM card, because it's just the strongest card in the pack. Tavern Keeper is good if you want to build a lot of rooms as well. And in addition to that, it gives you a food and a grain each harvest if you have an empty space in your house. And that I thought was going to work nicely with my bargaining baker, because once I get, my fireplace, my cooking hearth, my clay oven, and my stone oven, I've baked all that grain. I'm going to want to have more grain in order to sow to get points, as well as to bake to feed. So the Tavern Keeper can get me some grain for free. And I mean, didn't really plan on playing him, but yeah, but I ended up taking him. Okay, so that was just an analysis of my occupation cards. So sorry if this I'm just gonna do this one draft. Anyone still watching, thank you. Please give me feedback or whatever. Sort of going on a bit too long, and this definitely would be more interesting if I could do it live, if I had the recording of me actually drafting the cards and seeing all of them together. I'm trying to do the same thing, talk about the same things that I thought of while I was drafting. Of course, I don't have the ADP and the power stats available to me when I'm drafting, but I generally have a sense of what goes where. And if you've been playing and you're not like, you have no idea, because certainly if you play offline with your family and friends, you don't keep stats like power and ADP, I'm sure. You just have a general sense of what's good and what's not so good. So I'm trying to give you a sense of what's good, what's not so good, and most importantly, why. So, okay. So I'm looking at my first minor pile, and it's a pretty easy first pick. Clay Roof is an amazing card. So let's take a look at Clay Roof. I think that's a K-deck miner. Nope. Not an E-deck card. Clay Roof, okay. Clay Roof. Why is Clay Roof good? Instead of having to pay 2 reed, you're going to have to pay 2 clay. They're about the same. Well, the reason Clay Roof is so good is because clay accumulates faster and is more readily available to you, especially in the early game. Because in the early game, a lot of players will take 2 reed with their first action, because 2 reed is very nice. It gives you all the reed you need to build a room. If you're playing a 4, reedstone food is a very good spot. So what Clay Roof does is it says, oh, you didn't get on a 2 reed or enough reedstone food. That's fine. Take starting player, play Clay Roof, and you didn't get reed, so you definitely got clay. So use the clay to build and extend your house. In addition to that, um, clay, you know, after you've built your first room, you don't have a lot of use for reed anymore unless you're going to play Basket Maker's Workshop or some miners that cost reed. But probably you're going to have no use for reed anymore except for to renovate your house. Well, instead of taking 2 reed, you can play clay roof, which will let you use clay instead, which, oftentimes you'll have like an extra 1 or 2 clay left over at the end of the game. Instead of doing that, instead of having 1 or 2 clay and having to take reed, you can play clay roof instead. And on top of its great ability is it's worth a point. So clay roof is just a really, really strong card. Um, yeah. It's an E deck card, so even if you don't have any of these other decks, the WM or the France deck, uh, Clay Roof is still, one of the strongest miners out there. So other cards in its pile, the other ones that I considered taking are Keys, and I did end up picking Clay Roof. Lowest ADP and highest power. Whenever those two things come together, it's usually a pretty easy pick. So I can look at Keys. So Keys is an interesting card because what it lets you do is it lets you take starting player and then and you play Keys, and then on your next action you can build a room even if someone else tries to block you. So often what happens when everybody's queuing up to grow their family, people are taking the person who built the first room wants to guarantee growing first, so they'll go on starting player, go on starting player, go on starting player. What Keys lets you do is it lets you basically jump the queue. So say you were going to be the third person to grow. Well, a lot of the times you can take starting player, play Keys, and then you have an unblockable build room action. So you've basically gone from third to first in the family growth queue, and that sometimes can really change the game in your favor. Um, yeah, so Keys is a good card, especially if nobody else knows about it. You can use it to very devastating effect, especially if someone's really counting on, getting that first room. Um, yeah, it lets you jump your position, and even if you never use its effect, it's 1 stone for 1 point, which is a fine conversion rate. Um, Grotto is a France deck card. Now Grotto lets you, formerly called the Bat Cave, or Underground Cavern, or whatever. I thought of it as the Bat Cave. Um, what Grotto does is it gives you clay and stone, but its main function is that you can pay 2 food a bunch of times and then have room for a family member. So if you have a way to get a lot of food early on, and you're going to want to stay on 3 rooms, you can grow normally, play Grotto at some point, and then you can get your 4th growth even without building a 4th room. And cards that let you do that are very, very strong. Another example of that is Farm Steward. Farm Steward is super strong because you can build 3 rooms, then renovate to clay, and then grow again, without having to pay another 5 wood for another room or 5 clay for another clay room. Um, yeah, so cards that do that are usually very strong. Grotto is really expensive in terms of its food cost, but if you have a way to get food early, it's very nice. Or if you have reason to want it to stay on 2 rooms. Um, Another good card is Ladder. Pretty good minor improvement. So Ladder is good for similar reasons to Clay Roof, in that wood is much more easily available than reed. And also, it eliminates the need for you to take reed in order to renovate later on in the game. So ladder's a pretty good card, but yeah, clay roof, pretty easy first pick. So yeah, so my guess was keys is going to get taken, ladder's going to get taken, and then grotto's going to get taken, maybe guest instead of grotto. So I'm going to get, grotto, guest, uh, kitchen table, which I'm probably not going to play, liquid manure, which I'm not going to play, flail, which I'm not going to play, all these cards. Like I pretty much know that I'm not going to play the second miner out of this pile, which is good to know at least. It's good to be aware of. Okay, so my second pile. So I have a card in Broom, which is the highest power and the highest ADP. So that should have been an easy pick for me. And to be honest, most of the time it probably would have. I would have taken Broom. So just to remind you of what Broom does. Broom is nice because say you have a handful of crap minor improvements, except for one or two. Well, you play the one or two early on in the game, then you play Broom, and you get a whole new pile, and maybe you get some really good cards in there. Maybe you get Grotto, or maybe you get Quarry, maybe you get Clay Roof, maybe you get Swan Lake, maybe you get some other really good minor that's going to be really good for you. And if not, well, you basically just paid a wood to still have a crap hand. So it's not a big risk, but it could have a huge reward. So normally I would have taken Broom, but instead I took the baking tray. And the reason I took baking tray is because of the bargaining baker. So baking tray says clay oven and stone ovens are minor improvements and they're cheaper. So not only are the ovens that I wanted to play anyways cheaper, but they're also minor improvements. And the fact that they're minor improvements is huge is because normally you'd have to renovate or go on major minor in order to build a clay oven. Now I can do it with family growth. So I can family growth and build a clay oven and get 5 food. That's an amazing turn because not only do you grow your family, but you can also get 5 food and 2 points, which is really strong. Um, Again, and it also makes them cheaper. And say someone else is looking like they're gonna take the clay oven. Well, instead of you having to go on major minor, you can go on starting player and play it. So baking tray combos really well with that card. Also on here, Strawberry Patch has a good power. Strawberry Patch is a very situational card because it's very rare that you're going to get a lot of it's very rare that you're going to get a lot of food from it, but it's usually going to be worth 2 points for you, which is really nice. A free miner for 2 points is amazing, but it's extremely situational, and that's why its power is where it is, I would say. Start classification meal. There's a card that if I played Manservant, well, I would have taken that because it gives me a reason to go to a stone house, but not planning on doing that. So, yeah, no need to belabor the point. Baking Tray's best card here for me. Broom's going to get taken. Brushwood Roof's going to get taken. So I'm probably going to get, Strawberry Patch, Star Classification Meal, or Lumber back, all of which are fine cards. Shepherd's Crock too, actually. Shepherd's Crock's a good card. But yeah, so for me, Baking Tray's easy first pick there. Okay, so my third pile. So I've got Clay Roof and I've got Baking Tray. And then I see Clay Supports. And this card can absolutely make a fine game amazing. So the reason that Clay Supports is so good is because normally when you're building a room, it costs you 7 resources. So 5 wood or 5 clay and 2 reed. What clay supports does is you pay 2 wood in order to have a base cost of 4 resources. So clay supports on only one room decreases the cost by 1. But more than that, if you're going to pay more rooms, like play lots of rooms, after the clay supports, it's basically saving you 3 resources per room, which could be huge. It's also really nice in that it reduces the reed cost. So if you're reed starved early on, clay supports makes the reed cheaper. It also requires a mixture of clay and wood. So sometimes if you want to build 2 rooms, it can be hard to get 10 clay and it can be hard to get 10 wood, but it's pretty easy to get 5 wood and 5 clay, which is all you need to build 2 rooms with clay supports. It's a really nice card. Um, you don't necessarily have to use it to build your first room. Like sometimes you see people will pass up on growing their first room in order to reno and then clay supports. Um, I don't think that's necessarily the best use for this card. Maybe that could be fine if you have a reason to go to clay room super early. But I think the best use for this card is you build a room like normal, build a wooden room, then you renovate, and then when you renovate, you play clay supports, or you play clay supports with your family growth or whatever. Um, and then you can build another room for super cheap, but more often than not you're going to want to build 2 or 3 rooms. So you can get to a 5 or 6 room house very easily with clay supports, and even if you stay on clay, that's a good amount of points, and it occupies a lot of space on your farmyard, so that means that fencing is cheaper and you don't need as many fields, and also it lets you grow your family a lot easier. So yeah, clay supports is a really nice card. And whenever, like I said, highest or best ADP and best power, pretty easy pick for me. Other cards that I looked at, so Lasso. Lasso is another. Is it in this one? Nope. Lasso is an IDEC card. And what Lasso does is instead of having to pick between, taking 2 cattle and plow sowing, you can do both, which is really nice. Basically lets you increase the quality of your second or third action a lot of the times. Of course, a lot of the time you just end up eating it, which, maybe you don't need to rush for it. But Lasso in general, if you're going to be eating with animals, pretty good card. Ruins is really expensive, costs 4 stones, so, unless you have a reason to get a lot of stone early, you're probably not going to take it. And then Chocolate is chocolate. I don't know why it's called Chocolate. It's a Franc miner, and it gives you 4 food, basically. It's 4 food that you can only use to pay for occupations, but if you're going to play 4 more occupations, then it's just 4 food, which is fine for a minor improvement. Anyways, so I took clay supports. So the other thing about clay supports is it combos really nicely with clay roof, because now I can build rooms for 3 clay and 1 wood, which is great because clay is pretty easy to get early on. Like, pretty easy to get a 4 clay action in round 1, and then like a 5 clay action in stage 1, and a 5 clay action in stage 2. You do 1 4 clay, 1 5 clay. That's 3 to reno, or 2 to reno, probably 3 to reno, and then 3 to build 2 rooms, which is really, really nice. So clay supports, I think, really improved my potential a lot there. So 4th miner. So I've got horse, home garden, looked at home garden, you look at canoe, you look at bonfire. I ended up taking horse. Horse is I think it's a K-Deck card. There it is. Yeah, horse. So what horse does is it seems counterintuitive because it's only worth 2 points if you're going to lose points. Um, but the other way to look at that is a lot of the times if you don't have a perfect farm, you're going to be losing 1 point for missing one type of animal anyways, unless you're planning on going for animals and fencing as like your main source of points. Well, if that's the case, then horse is basically a free 2 point card, which makes it really strong. And that's why I took it. Um, canoe's okay. Extra food in a reed is really handy early on. Um, there's canoe. Um, yeah, so extra food in a reed in a point is not bad, especially if you're going to take fishing, 2 or 3 times. Yeah, it ends up being fine, especially the reed early on. It's a fine card, but it's not as good as horse. It's much more like horse is pretty much good in almost any situation, but canoe is much more situational. Um, you know, card like bonfire is good to know that it's in the game because um, there are a couple things that you count on other people not being able to do. And one example of that is the person who gets to the first fireplace. If they're the only person with a way to eat animals, they have control of all the animal spots. Now, of course, if someone else has fences or stables, or just decides to, block them and, take the animals in order to and have them run away just to block the other person, you know, that can happen, but most of the time that's probably not going to happen. So if you have the first fireplace, you have control of that first sheep grab, so you can let it get up to 4 or 5 sheep, and then you get 8 food or 10 food with one action, which is really strong. Basically will feed you for 2 harvests. Uh, so knowing that a card like Bonfire is around is good to know because a player could take starting player, play Bonfire, so now they have a way to eat animals that they didn't have before, and then they first action take the sheep that you were counting on getting. Oh, hope you weren't counting on feeding with that, because if you were, you can be very screwed. Um, so it's always good to be aware of a card like Bonfire, and that also makes it a bit better too. So I did consider taking Bonfire. I guess I should pull Bonfire up. I think that's a WM card. Yes, Bonfire. So basically, you pay a wood in order to be able to, for 1 round, eat animals as if you had a cooking hearth. Um, the card is Home Garden. Home Garden gets you three food every time you renovate, which, if you're planning on renovating early, can be really strong because if you want to rush up to stone, it can get you 6 food before your third harvest, which basically pays for that third harvest for you, which can be really nice. But horse, far and away the best card here for me. Um, yeah, continuing. So I got my first pile back. I ended up taking Grotto. Guest was also available, and I didn't really consider any of the other cards. So take a look at Guest. I think Guest is an I card. There he is. Yeah. So Guest is basically pay 2 food in order to get an action. That would be good, especially if you have a lot of food. Downside is you have to pass it to the next player who also has that option. Um, so I ended up going with Grotto. I talked about Grotto earlier. Um, Now, the reason I went for grotto is because I'm thinking, well, maybe what I'll do is I'll use grotto in order to do my first family growth. So play grotto in round 1 or 2. Uh, Pay for the feeding with my bargaining baker. And then after I've used grotto for my first family growth, I can build a whole bunch of rooms with my clay roof and my clay supports combo, and then grow my fourth and fifth family member. So because one of the downsides of trying to go to clay early is what if renovate comes out after family growth? Well, then that can really set you back, because then all your other opponents who don't need to renovate to clay can grow a lot earlier for you than you. The other reason that I was thinking about grotto is because it kind of goes with tavern keeper as well, because I can keep a person on grotto instead of in my house, which lets me get a food and a grain at the harvest, and potentially a bonus point at the end of the game. So yeah, so I took grotto here. Uh, okay, so now this pile is back. So it's actually got 3 pretty good cards for me. So brushwood roof, lumber, and shepherd's crook. So looking for brushwood roof. So brushwood roof is similar to clay roof in why it's good, except it's not quite as good as clay roof because it's not worth a point. It requires 2 occupations, and you don't usually end the game with a bunch of leftover wood. Usually you use all your wood in order to fence. Like that's the last thing that you spend all your wood on. You build as many fences as you can, and you're not usually left over with a lot of extra wood. So brushwood roof is fine, but it's not as good as clay roof. So I didn't take that. There's also lumber, which I'm guessing is an I deck card, because it's a passing. No. There it is. It's a K deck card. So lumber is actually 1 stone for 3 wood, which is not bad. This is one of the cards that goes with stone cutter that I was talking about. Costs 1 stone. Well, if you have stone cutter, you play it for free and you get 3 wood for free, which can be really strong. Um, but it's actually not bad, because a lot of the times, you'll be wanting to build your second room, or you'll have wood miners that you want to play, but you're not going to get them. Lumber can help you with those problems. Also, maybe you have an extra stone because you were planning on getting an improvement, but somebody else beat you to it, so you know you can use it for lumber. Yeah. The card that I ended up taking, which I think is the best card, is, where is it? Shepherd's Crock. So Shepherd's Crock is nice in that um, even if you only use its ability once, you basically pay one wood, and a minor improvement action in order to get 2 sheep. So basically, you're paying 1 wood for an action, which, because taking 2 sheep is like a pretty normal action to take. Late game maybe 3 is more common, but 2 is absolutely fine, and that could also be 2 points. If you have no sheep and you build a fence, it can be worth 2 points for you at the end of the game. It's also a breeding pair, which is nice because you build fences, you get these 2 sheep, then they breed, and now you have 3 sheep, and 3 of an animal is optimal because you can eat the 3rd animal, and then the breeding pair will breed a 3rd one back, so you basically have 3 in perpetuity, which give you, 2 food every harvest or whatever. So I ended up going with Shepherd's Crock because I thought that that would be good for me. Also, since I'm planning on building a lot of rooms, I'm probably going to fence really late. So Shepherd's Crock is a good card in that sense because, you do a big fence at the end of the game. Oh, and you get an extra 2 points, which is nice. And finally, in my last pile, I've got lasso, chocolate, alms, and friendly pastures. So at this point, I've got my mind pretty set on what I'm going to play and when. So I've got clay roof, baking tray, clay support. I know I'm going to play all of those. I'm going to probably build a room and then renovate and then build 2 or 3 rooms with clay supports. I'm not really going to focus on plowing fields. I'm going to feed with my bargaining baker and my tavern keeper. So I have a pretty good sense of what I'm going to do when at this point. Um, so I don't want to, with this pick, I'm not going to do a pick that's going to make me change my game plan. For example, Lasso is a good card, but it's worthless for me in this situation because I'm not going to focus on animals early. Probably not going to get a cooking hearth. I might get a fireplace, but I'm probably not going to get a cooking hearth. So I don't want to be taking a lot of animals. Um, yeah. And then chocolate is good, is a good card, except I'm probably only planning on playing 4 occupations at most. You know, I'm probably only going to play my. I'll go look at what my remind myself. So I'm going to play bargaining baker. So I'm not going to play stable deliveryman. I might play magician. Not going to play fiddler. I'll play fence dealer and I'll play tavern keeper. So I'm only going to play 4 or 5 occupations, in which case chocolate sort of goes down in value a little because probably when you play chocolate, you've already played 1 or 2 occupations, in which case you need to play 4 more to get maximum benefit out of it. So what I did with this pick is said, you know, maybe the start of the game goes really awful for me. I don't get to play a miner on the first 2 rounds. While Alms is a card that can help you get over a really bad start, because it can get you a bunch of food for free, and even though it's a passing miner, it's usually useless to all the other players in the game because when you play it, most of the time you're the last person that hasn't, you're the only person that hasn't played an occupation. So it's basically a bunch of free food for you and it's a useless card for everyone else. So I took Alms because, I mean, chocolate would have been fine for me. Lasso would have been okay. Um, but I took Alms because it's kind of like a fallback plan. Like, okay, in case the start of the game goes really badly for me, I can use Alms to get myself out of it. Okay, so that's been me talking for a really long time. Um, so I'll actually show you how my farm. I ended up winning this game that I drafted. It was a pretty close game. I got helped out by farm steward, so someone else played the farm steward, which I knew about in the draft. So, you know, my 5 or 6 rooms was nice. Let's take a look at my final farm. So this is what my final farm ended up looking like. So I ended up with 46 points. I had 6 clay rooms, which was pretty much how I planned on it going. I had used my tavern keeper. I played it in stage 3 or 4 to get me a couple food and a couple grain. And then it was also worth 2 bonus points at the end of the game because I actually, instead of growing to my 5th family member, I chose not to because with Tavern Keeper, you know, your family member occupies a spot that would be a bonus point, so growing is only a 2-point action, and I didn't have any, like the miner that I wanted to play. So I ended up playing, I got a fireplace, I played baking tray, and then I got clay oven and stone oven, and I also got a really nice 3 stone grab, so that when I renovated to clay, I played the well, and then I played, you know, clay roof really late, but I played it before building my 5th and 6th room, so used that benefit there. And then horse I played right like at the end of the game because I didn't go in starting player that much. I didn't need to. So I had a pretty strong game, all things considered. I ended up with 46 points and a pretty nice farm. I mean, I'm missing, could have one more type of animals, and could have more vegetables, and getting to stone would have been really good, but don't need to be too greedy. I only ended up playing 3 miners. So I played bargaining baker, which I knew for sure I would, and I played fence dealer in order to fence this little area for 6 wood, and I played tavern keeper. So I didn't end up playing the village fool, which I could have. I have those other 3 occupations plus 3 more miners to discard, but I didn't need to. There was no real big pressure on me. I had other good actions to do throughout the game. So yeah, so I think that's going to be the end of it for this video. Really appreciate it if you've stuck around. Thanks a lot. Hopefully this made some sense to you, and you can improve your draft in your games. Um, yeah, if you ever want to, if you haven't, you should for sure check out Play-agricola.com. People on there are usually pretty friendly to play. Yeah, so you should check it out. Otherwise, good luck in your own games. Please feel free to comment and shoot me a message on the YouTube page if you have any feedback. If you stuck around this long, thanks a lot. This has been Draft Analysis from William. Take it easy.